Good evening, no matter where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Tonight, you're stepping into a place where stories don't just scare you, they follow you. This is the dark side of the Appalachians, where truth hides in the fog and the trees remember every scream. Each story you'll hear tonight was inspired by real encounters, told by people who never fully came back the same. So, dim the lights, let the quiet settle, and listen carefully. If you're new here, like, subscribe, and stay tuned, because these are the stories that never stop echoing after midnight. New horrors arrive here every day, and trust me, you won't want to face them alone. Until next time, keep your doors locked, and never follow the sound calling your name. You probably won't believe this, but I swear it's true. I've been hauling freight up and down the Appalachians for 22 years, mostly night routes. There's a stretch of Route 219 in West Virginia, right between Mill Creek and Huttonsville, where my CB radio starts acting up every single time. It's just a low hiss at first, then this voice, faint, like it's bleeding through from another frequency. A woman's voice, always the same, always saying the same thing. Is anyone out there? The first time I heard it was back in 2017. I figured it was just some trucker's wife messing with a scanner, trying to get a rise out of us. Happens more than you think. But it kept happening, always in the same mile of road, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning. Some nights I had switched channels, 19, 23, 14, it didn't matter. The voice slipped through like the static itself carried it. For years, I ignored it. I'd crank up the radio, drown it out with old country or late night AM talk shows. But around last winter, things started changing. The voice got clearer, louder, and one night she said my name. Tom! I damn near dropped my thermos. I hadn't used my handle on the CB all night. Breaker, this is Blackbird, I said, trying to steady my voice. Who's calling? No answer, just the hiss again, like wind rushing through pine needles. I kept driving. Snow was coming down heavy, the kind that turns the road into a mirror. Then, about a mile ahead, my high beams caught something. Figures, just off the shoulder. Looked like a few people standing there, but when I slowed down, they were gone. The road was empty. That was the first time I felt real cold crawl into my chest, not from the air, but from inside me, like I'd swallowed something that didn't belong. The next night I drove the same stretch again. I told myself I was overreacting. The voice? Probably radio interference. The figures? Shadows, snow reflections, tricks of the light. But deep down, I knew better. Because that second night, the woman's voice said more. Tom, slow down. Her tone wasn't panicked. It was pleading, like she was right there in the cab beside me. I eased off the gas instinctively, confused, staring into the dark ahead. Then my headlights caught the edge of a rock slide. An entire section of the road collapsed into the ravine. If I hadn't braked, I'd have gone straight into it. I pulled over, shaking. Snow hammered the windshield. The CB crackled again, and for a moment, I thought I heard crying. Who are you? I said, pressing the mic. How did you know? Static. Then, don't let him follow you. I looked into the rearview mirror. The highway behind me was empty, nothing but swirling white. But something about that phrase, don't let him follow you, hit like a gut punch. It sounded less like a warning and more like a confession. I couldn't sleep that day. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I kept replaying the voice in my head, wondering if maybe someone was pranking me, maybe another driver with a directional rig messing with my signal, but the thing was, no one else reported hearing it. I asked around at the truck stops, at the rest area near Elkins, blank stares, nervous laughs. You hearing ghosts again, Tom? But then, one night in February, the voice didn't ask for help. It said something different, something that made me pull over and shut the engine off completely. She said, he's in the truck with you. I don't remember what I did after that. Just that I sat there with the heater running, eyes on the passenger seat, and the air felt too thick to breathe. And when I finally looked up at the windshield, there were handprints on the inside. That was the night I realized the voice wasn't just coming through the radio, it was coming for me. I didn't go back on Route 219 for 2 weeks after that night. Dispatch thought I was sick. Truth was, I was terrified. Every time I looked at my rig, I thought about those handprints. They'd faded by morning, but I'd swear they were there, pressed deep enough to fog the glass from inside. When I finally did return, it wasn't by choice. The company rerouted me to pick up a lumber load in Elkins, the only way there was through the mountain pass I had sworn off. I told myself it would be fine, daylight, clear skies, nothing to fear, except the voice came back before sundown. I was coming up on the old mill curve when the static started bleeding in again, thin, sharp, like ice cracking in water. Then that same woman whispered, "Tom, you shouldn't have come back." I hit the brake so hard the load groaned behind me. The CB fizzed and died. I tried to reset it, cycle through channels. Dead air. My phone had no service. The GPS froze, then blinked out completely, screen white. That's when I noticed something odd outside. The world looked wrong. Too still, no movement in the trees, no wind. Even the snowflakes that had just started falling seemed to hang there in the air, like someone had hit pause. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw him, a man standing on the embankment across the road. No coat, no hat, just a thin figure in a dark shirt. I blinked, and he was gone. I started driving again, faster this time. The radio crackled alive without me touching it. "She told you not to come back." The voice wasn't hers. This one was deeper, a low, grainy rumble that made the speakers shake. It didn't sound human. I shouted into the mic, "Who the hell is this?" No answer, just a long, dragging breath, like someone exhaling right into my ear. The CB light flickered. Then, faint beneath the static, I heard a woman sobbing. Not over the airwaves, behind me. I looked in the rearview mirror. The bunk curtain was half open. The space behind it looked darker than it should have been. Like the shadows, they were thicker, heavier. "Tom," she whispered again. I slammed the brakes and jumped out, stumbling into the cold. The night air burned my lungs. I ran around to the back of the truck, yanked open the sleeper door. Empty. Nothing but my jacket and a thermos rolling on the floor. But the crying didn't stop. It came from the radio still sitting on the dash. I leaned in, trembling. "What do you want from me?" The answer came through like broken glass. "You should have stopped for me." That hit me hard, because in that moment, I remembered something I'd buried. Winter, 5 years ago. Same road, same stretch. Snowstorm so thick I couldn't see 5 feet ahead. There'd been a car off the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. I saw it too late to stop. I slowed, almost pulled over, but the slope was too steep. And I told myself someone else would call it in. I drove on. The next morning I heard the report on the radio. I didn't tell anyone what I remembered that night. Didn't tell dispatch, didn't tell my wife. What was I supposed to say? That the ghost of a woman I'd passed by years ago was whispering through my CB radio? They'd have taken my license, maybe my sanity. But the guilt didn't fade. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw that snow-covered shoulder again, those hazard lights blinking like dying stars. I started checking old news articles, accident logs, police reports. There it was, December 11th, 2017. A white Honda Civic slid off Route 219 in heavy snow. The driver, Laura May Carden, was pronounced dead at the scene. They said she was calling for help when her phone died. They found the car's headlights still on. I stared at her photo for hours. Blonde hair, blue jacket, mid-30s. The same voice, I knew it deep down. For a week I didn't drive. I thought about quitting, selling the rig, leaving the mountains altogether. But then one night, as I sat in the dark lot behind a diner in Marlinton, the CB lit up again. I hadn't even turned it on. Tom. Just that, one word. Calm, familiar, not angry. I froze. My hand hovered over the switch, ready to shut it off for good, but something stopped me. "What do you want?" I asked. There was a pause, then static rustled like dry leaves. "Help me go home." Those 4 words settled in my chest like a stone. I didn't understand what she meant. Home where? Home how? Still, I drove. Route 219, midnight, same path. The snow was light this time, drifting lazily in the beams of my headlights. The road felt longer than usual, like it stretched deeper into something it shouldn't. The radio hummed. "You're close," she said. "He's behind you again." I checked my mirrors, nothing but dark. Then the CB hissed, and another voice slipped through. The man's. She's lying, Tom. She never left. The temperature in the cab dropped fast. Frost crept along the inside of the windshield, the kind that forms patterns like veins. My breath clouded white. She's mine, the man's voice rasped. The headlights flickered, the engine sputtered. I floored the gas, praying the truck wouldn't stall on the incline. The radio screamed with overlapping voices. Hers, his, others I didn't recognize. All pleading, whispering, growling my name. At the next bend, the world went white. Snow blinded me, so thick it looked solid. I felt something, someone, grab the back of my neck, ice-cold fingers digging into my skin. I swerved, tires skidding. The truck jackknifed, slammed into the guardrail, and stopped inches from the drop. The windshield spiderwebbed, glass glittering like frostbite. Silence. Then, through the broken static, her voice again, soft, almost relieved. Thank you. The radio went dead. I sat there for what felt like hours, engine idling, the heater blowing against the freezing air. When I finally stepped out, the snow had stopped. The road behind me was untouched, no tire marks, no footprints, no sign I'd even driven there. But halfway down the guardrail, there was a small wooden cross. Fresh, the name carved into it, Laura May Carden. I haven't driven that route since. Sold the rig, moved to Florida, but sometimes, late at night, I still keep a CB radio by my bed. Every few weeks, it crackles awake on its own, and I swear I still hear her whisper, "Keep driving, Tom." I never answer anymore, because last time I did, another voice whispered back. A man's. He said, "She's still waiting at the turn." And when I checked the radio's display that night, the channel wasn't on 19 anymore, it was on 219. I used to think nothing underground could surprise me. I've worked structural inspection for 20 years, crawling through mines, tunnels, and collapsed shafts all over Appalachia, but the one near Logan, West Virginia, that one wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. It started when the county sent me to evaluate the stability of an abandoned coal mine they wanted to repurpose into a storm shelter. The place had been sealed since the 80s after a methane explosion killed 9 men. The locals still called it Dead Man's Mouth. I thought it was just superstition until I stepped inside. The air was colder than it should have been, dry metallic, almost breathing. My flashlight beam caught layers of soot frozen into the walls, black veins crawling through the stone like they'd never healed. The deeper I walked, the more the sound changed. At first it was just echo, then something slower, rhythmic. A pulse. I stopped near the first junction and checked my instruments. Oxygen normal, no methane detected, but the ground vibrated faintly under my boots, steady as a heartbeat. There wasn't supposed to be machinery still running down there. I radioed my partner, Ellis, who was waiting topside. "You hearing anything weird from your end?" "Just you breathing heavy, man," he joked. But his voice broke up halfway through the sentence, like the signal was getting strangled. "Repeat that," I asked. Silence, then faintly, "Don't go deeper." I climbed back a few feet toward the shaft entrance, trying to get a signal. Nothing. The radio hissed and clicked. Then I heard someone else. It wasn't Ellis. The voice was low and dry, like rock dust scraped against stone. I couldn't make out words, but it had cadence, syllables too deliberate to be random noise. I backed up, scanning the walls with my light. The tunnels split ahead in 3 directions. The one to my left was narrower, filled with wooden support beams eaten away by time. Something about that passage felt wrong, like the shadows there were thicker. I marked it with chalk and decided to check the main vein first. Every 30 feet, I stopped to document cracks and take pressure readings. The deeper I went, the stronger the pulse beneath the floor became. It matched my heartbeat at first, then started to sink against it. I tried to steady my breathing, but it kept throwing me off. Boom, pause, boom, boom, pause. The kind of pattern that doesn't come from machines or geology. something alive. At the third junction, my flashlight flickered and dimmed. The batteries were fresh. I'd replaced them at the truck. I tapped the casing, no change. When the beam stabilized, I realized I wasn't alone. There were handprints on the wall, dozens of them, some small, like children's. The soot was disturbed in perfect ovals, smeared upward, as if people had been clawing toward the surface. I stood frozen, my breath fogging in the beam. Then I heard it. Air moving behind me, not a gust, not a breeze. Breathing. A long, drawn-out inhale that seemed to pull the air from my lungs. I spun around. The tunnel was empty. My radio crackled again, but all I caught was a whisper. They're still working. The sound came from deeper inside. Against every protocol, I followed it. Maybe it was adrenaline. Maybe I just didn't want to believe how wrong everything felt. The tunnel narrowed until I had to crouch. The floor dipped sharply, slick with condensation. At the end, the stone gave way to a black pit, freshly cut, edges too clean for something abandoned 40 years. My light barely reached the bottom. Then the breathing stopped, and from that pit came a single noise, 3 slow knocks, hollow, like a hand striking metal from far below. When I leaned closer to listen, something knocked back. I scrambled backwards so fast I scraped my palms raw against the stone. The sound from the pit hadn't echoed right. It was too close, too sharp, like whatever had knocked wasn't at the bottom but pressed against the wall beside me. I steadied my light. The surface looked solid, but the more I stared, the more it rippled in tiny movements. I thought maybe gas buildup was distorting the air. Then a line appeared across the wall, a narrow seam of black. And from inside it came another slow knock, 3 taps, perfectly spaced. "Ellis," I shouted into my radio, "get a crew ready. I've got structural movement down here." Static, then a faint reply. "You're not supposed to be there." It didn't sound like Ellis anymore. The tone was off, flat, echoing. I switched the unit off and started climbing back, but the passage felt longer than before. Every beam groaned. Dust rained from the ceiling. My breath came fast, and the air tasted wrong, dry and sweet, like iron mixed with rot. Halfway up, I passed the wall with the handprints again, only now there were more of them. Fresh ones, no dust inside the outlines. The soot looked smudged like something had brushed by recently. I tried to move faster, but the floor had turned soft. My boots sank half an inch into the clay that hadn't been there before. When I looked down, faint shapes pulsed beneath the surface, ridges like ribs shifting in rhythm. I stumbled, hit my knee, and the ground exhaled. The noise wasn't air escaping. It was a sigh, a long, hollow release from somewhere deeper underfoot. That's when I dropped my equipment bag and just ran. I didn't care about safety protocols or documentation anymore. My flashlight beam darted off the tunnel walls, catching faces where there shouldn't have been any, patterns in the soot that looked too human. One blinked as I passed. At the incline near the first shaft junction, the tunnel ceiling began to creak, and then I heard something I'll never forget. Voices, dozens of them, not loud, not screaming, whispering in unison, words I couldn't make out. The rhythm matched the knocks from before, tap, 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 whisper, whisper, whisper. Sounded like the mine itself was repeating some broken prayer. I kept climbing until the passage widened, and there it was, the chalk mark I'd made earlier. Only now, beside it, someone had written something new. Stay below. The letters were carved deep into the stone, gouged by something metallic. I stopped to catch my breath. The sound behind me grew louder, the whispers blending into a low, wet rasp. It wasn't echoing anymore, it was following. I pushed forward and finally saw the faint daylight bleeding through the wooden slats sealing the exit. Relief flooded me. I climbed up the slope, dropped my gear, and slammed my shoulder against the boards until one cracked loose. Cold air poured in. I shoved through the gap, pulling myself into the sunlight. For a second, I just lay there on the gravel, gasping. Then Ellis's voice came through the radio, clear as day. "Hey, where the hell are you? You were supposed to wait for clearance." My stomach dropped. "I've been down there 2 hours," I said. "You told me to go in." There was silence then. "I just got back from lunch. I never called you in." I didn't respond, just stared at the mine entrance. The boards I'd broken through were already slick with condensation, and something dark was seeping through the cracks. It wasn't water. It looked thicker, like oil, but it pulsed with the same rhythm I'd felt underground. Ellis walked up beside me, frowning. "You okay, man? You look like hell." I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could speak, the ground beneath the entrance shuddered. A gust of warm air burst out, smelling like burnt meat, and faintly, beneath the sound of rushing wind, came a voice, soft, familiar. "Help us finish the shift." When Ellis leaned in to listen, the mine breathed out his name. We should have left right then. Ellis wanted to call it in, but curiosity has a way of eating through good sense. I told him there might be workers' remains trapped below, that the sound could be escaping gas pockets. Lies, mostly to convince myself that what I'd heard was explainable. We sealed the entry again with plywood, braced it, and decided to come back the next morning with a full crew. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I shut my eyes, I felt that vibration under me, the same pulse from the mine floor. It wasn't just sound, it was rhythm, moving through my bones. Around 3 a.m., the power went out across the motel. I thought it was coincidence until I noticed my phone vibrating. No number. Just a blank caller ID. When I answered, there was no voice, just 3 hollow knocks. The next morning, the mine looked different. The boards were gone. In their place was a clean, open mouth of darkness, cold air spilling out in steady breaths. Ellis stared at it, muttering that someone must have broken in overnight. But there were no footprints, no tire marks, no tools missing. "I'll go first," I said. "Like hell," he shot back. "You said it wasn't stable." "It wasn't," I said, "but it wants us down there." He gave me a look that said I wasn't making sense, but followed anyway. The moment we crossed the threshold, the light shifted. It didn't dim, it bent. My flashlight beam stretched too far, disappearing into a black curve that didn't end where it should have. The walls looked wet, but when I touched one, it was warm. Beneath the surface, something pulsed, slow, patient. About 50 yards in, we reached a collapsed support. Half buried in rubble was a metal tag, rusted and cracked, but the name was clear, E. Hollis. Ellis froze. "That's my grandfather," he whispered. "He died in the '83 blast." Before I could speak, a sound echoed up from the dark ahead, steel clanging, steady, like picks hitting stone, work rhythm. Voices rose again, chanting that same broken pattern. Tap, 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 whisper, whisper. Ellis took a step forward, calling out. "Grandpa," the tunnel answered with a single heavy knock. Then another, then silence. I grabbed him by the jacket, pulled him back. "We're leaving. Now." We turned toward the entrance, and it wasn't there anymore. The tunnel stretched back into a slope that hadn't existed minutes ago. No light, no air. Only the mine's slow, hungry breathing. We ran. The sound chased us, echoing off the stone, footsteps that weren't ours. Boots crunching on gravel. Every few seconds I heard voices, calling our names, switching between tones that weren't quite human. When my flashlight flickered, I saw figures walking beside us in the dark. Not solid, just outlines of men, translucent and grey, each with lamps burned out on their helmets. They moved in rhythm, tools dragging across the ground. None had faces. Ellis tripped. I grabbed his arm, but his boot sank into the clay floor and didn't come back up. The ground swallowed it like wet sand. He screamed, clawing at the dirt, but it was already creeping up his leg, pulling him in inch by inch. I yanked, dug, cursed, but the more I pulled, the more the ground breathed. I could feel it inhaling. "Help me!" he shouted. Then the air around us collapsed. A pressure wave knocked me back, and when I looked again, the tunnel was empty. No Ellis, just his helmet lying on the clay, light still on, faintly pulsing in time with the mine's heartbeat. I don't remember how I got out. My next clear memory is standing on the road, covered in dust, coughing up black mud. The entrance behind me had sealed again, stone fused like it had never been cut. The rescue team searched for 2 days. No sign of Ellis. They called it a cave-in. I know better, because every night since, I hear it again. 3 knocks on my floorboards, deep below my house, like the mine followed me home. And when I press my ear to the ground, the earth still answers, working, breathing, waiting. I grew up near Roan Mountain, Tennessee, and I know those woods better than most people. My cousin Ben and I hiked every ridge, every hollow, every half-forgotten trail marker since we were kids. So when I tell you we found a church that doesn't exist on any map, I mean that literally. It was late September, the air sharp with that sweet rot of falling leaves. We were trying to take a shortcut from the Appalachian Trail down to an old service road where we'd parked. We weren't lost, just tired, cutting across a slope we hadn't tried before. Around dusk, fog rolled in, thick and low, swallowing the forest floor until only the tops of the trees were visible. Ben joked about the Smoky Mountain spirits, but he kept glancing behind him. The woods had gone quiet. No wind, no birds, not even the soft ticking of insects. The silence pressed in like something alive. Then we saw the light. At first it looked like a campfire, orange and flickering between the trees. We pushed closer, expecting maybe a hunter or late hiker, but as we descended, the glow turned steady, like lamplight. The fog parted just enough for us to see it, a small white church sitting in a clearing that hadn't been there before. It was plain, maybe 1 room, with narrow windows and a steeple leaning slightly to one side. No power lines, no road leading to it, just a set of steps half buried in the earth. The strangest part was the sound. There was singing coming from inside, a low, droning hymn. No words, just voices humming in unison. Probably a revival, Ben whispered. But there were no cars, no lanterns outside, no footprints in the mud. Still, he pushed the door open before I could stop him. The singing stopped instantly. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and candle smoke. Dozens of candles lined the walls, melted down into thick stalactites of wax. The pews were full. At least, that's what I thought at first. But when my eyes adjusted, I realized the shapes in the pews weren't moving. They were mannequins. Old, wooden, jointed figures wearing faded black clothes. Each had a mask carved into its face. Blank eyes, open mouths. Ben laughed nervously. Art project, maybe. Then one of the figures shifted. Just a little. Enough that its head tilted toward us with a dry wooden creak. We froze. "Hello," I said, voice cracking. No answer. Ben took a step toward the pulpit. The floorboards moaned under his boots, and the sound echoed strange. Too deep. Like the church was hollow underneath. He knelt, brushed dust away from the floor, and found something carved into the wood. No cross. No grace. That's when I noticed the walls. Every surface was scratched with the same phrase over and over again, thousands of times, layered until the words blurred into each other. Something started humming again. Not the mannequins, the building. The walls vibrated, the floorboards trembled, and that deep droning sound returned, rolling through the church like thunder. Ben grabbed my arm. We're leaving. As we turned, the door slammed shut on its own. The candles flared brighter, flames stretching tall and white. The mannequins' heads all turned toward us at once. The air stank of hot wax and rot. We rushed to the windows, but they were gone, smooth walls where they'd been seconds ago. The sound grew louder, like a choir underground. I pounded on the door until my fists bled. Then, as sudden as it began, everything stopped. Silence. The door creaked open an inch, revealing only fog outside. We didn't look back when we ran, but halfway through the woods, Ben stopped and turned to me, pale and shaking. "Did you see the altar?" he asked. "No," I said, breathless. "Why?" He swallowed hard. "Because it had my name carved on it." When we finally made it to the truck, the church bell started ringing from somewhere behind the trees, and it kept ringing even after we drove 10 miles away. For 2 days, Ben didn't talk about what we saw. He kept saying it must have been a fever dream, or some kind of tourist stunt gone wrong. But I knew he was lying to himself. He barely slept, jumped every time the wind rattled the windows, and kept his porch light on all night. By the 3rd day, the ringing started again. It came faintly through the trees, low and steady, like a single iron bell tolling from miles away. I tried to convince myself it was just some old church in town, but it wasn't Sunday, and it only rang after sunset. When I called Ben, he answered in a whisper. "You hear it too?" We met up that night with the flashlights and drove back toward the ridge. The fog was thicker than before, swallowing our headlights whole. When we parked where the service road ended, the bell stopped. I told him we shouldn't go any farther, but he was already climbing the trail. "If it's real," he said, "we need to prove it." It took an hour to reach the clearing again, but this time the church wasn't there, just grass and fog. The ground where it had stood was flat, unbroken, no tracks, no foundation, not even a trace of ash from the candles. Ben looked ready to laugh, like he'd been hoping to find nothing all along. He turned to leave. That's when the ground under us shifted. The earth gave a soft sigh, and the air grew heavy with the scent of wax and mould. I swept my light across the clearing and saw them. Marks pressed into the dirt, dozens of oval impressions like footprints. Except they weren't shoe prints. They were bare, and all of them led in the same direction, toward us. Ben muttered something I didn't catch, then bolted for the trees. I followed, flashlight swinging wildly. The woods felt tighter, the path twisting into directions I didn't recognize. At some point, I realized the trees around us weren't the same ones we came through. Their bark looked pale and wet, almost fleshy, and the air smelled like candle smoke again. The bell started ringing, louder now, right above us. We broke into a clearing and froze. The church was back, same leaning steeple, same faint orange light glowing through the cracks. The door was open this time. Ben backed up. "No, not again." I nodded, but the air behind us was moving, whispering. The fog coiled like something alive, and for a second I swore I saw faces inside it, pale shapes watching. We ran toward the church because it was the only thing solid left in that place. Inside, the candles were new, burning clean, dripping bright red wax. The pews were empty now. Only the altar remained, and on it, a small wooden cross lying sideways. Ben stepped closer. "It wasn't here before," he said. The bell rang once more, deafening, shaking dust from the rafters. The cross rolled off the altar and hit the floor with a dull knock. Then the door slammed. The candles dimmed, and someone started walking down the aisle. The sound wasn't right, too slow, each footstep creaking like boards warping under immense weight. My light shook in my hand, beam darting across the pews until it landed on the figure. It wore a long black robe, face hidden by a veil of grey cloth. Beneath it, I saw the faint outline of a wooden mask, the same blank face as the mannequins. It stopped a few feet from Ben. He whispered, "What do you want from us?" The figure lifted one hand and pointed toward the altar. Then it spoke, voice dry and hollow. Ben shook his head, backing away from the thing in the robe. "No," he muttered, "we're not doing this." But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, pointing at the altar, waiting. The candles flickered with every breath we took, throwing its shadow across the walls. The shape looked wrong, its head too long, its shoulders twitching like something alive was crawling beneath the cloth. "Let's go," I whispered, pulling on Ben's sleeve. He didn't move. His flashlight hung limp in his hand. The bell rang again outside. One slow, heavy toll that seemed to come from underground this time. Then the floor shifted under us. The boards swelled and cracked, releasing a long hiss of air. And through the gaps I saw something moving beneath them. Not dirt, not roots, something pale and wet, pulsing slowly like veins under skin. The church wasn't built on the ground at all. It was growing out of it. Ben stumbled backward, whispering, "No cross, no grace, no cross, no grace." Over and over again, his voice sounded strange, hollow. The figure in the robe tilted its head toward him, like it was listening. "Stop saying that," I hissed. He didn't stop. The candles on the altar flared tall and white, smoke curling upward into symbols I didn't recognize. The air turned sour, thick like rotting oil. I grabbed Ben by the collar, but his skin was cold, clammy. He looked at me with eyes that weren't focused on anything in this world. The figure raised both hands and began to hum that same low hymn we'd heard the first night. One by one, the pews behind it filled, not with people, but with the mannequins from before. They emerged from the shadows, dragging their wooden limbs, heads jerking with every hum of the hymn. I ran for the door. It didn't budge. I slammed my shoulder into it. Nothing. Behind me, Ben's voice changed. Lower, layered, as if a dozen others were speaking through him. "They're waiting for the final verse," he said. "Ben, stop." He walked toward the altar, movements jerky, but determined, and picked up the fallen cross. It looked burned around the edges, blackened like charcoal. The humming grew louder, shaking the walls. I covered my ears, but it wasn't just sound. It was vibration crawling into my bones. Ben turned to me, holding the cross tight. His mouth moved, but I could barely hear him through the noise. "We shouldn't have left," he said. "They didn't finish." Then he drove the cross straight into the altar. The entire building convulsed. The walls cracked open, spewing red wax like blood. The mannequins screamed in unison, a shrill, splintering wail that made my vision blur. The floor gave way beneath Ben. I lunged forward, grabbing his arm, but the boards tore apart and something beneath pulled him down, something shaped like hands, but too long, too many. He disappeared into the darkness below. The figure in the robe stepped to the edge of the hole and turned toward me. I couldn't see its face through the veil, but I saw its mouth moving beneath it, forming words that cut through the noise. "You finished the prayer." The next thing I remember is daylight. I woke up outside, lying in the clearing where the church had stood. The air was still, the fog gone. There was no structure, no altar, only churned dirt and a single unmarked wooden cross standing in the middle. Ben was nowhere. The sheriff's department searched for 2 weeks. They found no trace of him, no signs of a building or collapse. They told me I must have been delirious, that Ben probably fell into a ravine. But every night since then, I hear that bell again, 3 slow tolls from somewhere in the trees. Sometimes, when I wake up sweating, the sound keeps going long after I'm fully awake. And when I look out the window toward the ridge, I swear I can see a faint orange glow flickering between the trees. Last night, I finally heard Ben's voice in the fog, singing that same wordless hymn, asking me to come finish the service. I was working appraisal contracts for a small firm out of Asheville, mostly foreclosed or repossessed properties tucked in the mountains. Isolated, run down, always cheap for a reason. The cabin on Hollow Ridge was supposed to be another routine evaluation. Drive up, take photos, write the report, leave. It had been vacant for nearly 12 years. The county records listed 2 owners, both deceased, no heirs. The bank wanted it cleared for resale. I left early that morning, tyres grinding up the gravel road that twisted through bare oaks. The sky was the colour of slate, rain coming. The cabin appeared suddenly between the trees. Grey wood, steep roof, windows shuttered tight. The porch sagged in the middle like an old spine. The moment I stepped out of the truck, I noticed the smell. Damp earth and mildew, stronger than usual. Like something underground had just been turned. I unlocked the door. The key didn't fit at first, but after some pressure it clicked and swung open on its own. Inside, the air was cool and stale. Furniture covered in dusty sheets. A fireplace full of black ash that looked fresh. I called out, just in case squatters were inside. No reply, only the sound of slow dripping. Water, somewhere in the back room. I followed it to the kitchen. A small leak dripped from the ceiling into a bowl someone had placed on the counter. The bowl was half full, and the water inside was dark. Not muddy, black like ink. I turned to check the ceiling above it, but the wood there was dry, no pipes overhead either. I remember standing there, just staring at that bowl, listening to each drop hit with a sound that wasn't quite right. Hollow, like something tapping from below. The sound of thunder rolled outside. I began my photos. Each room, the layout, condition of the foundation, routine. But the longer I stayed, the stranger the proportions felt. The rooms didn't line up with the exterior. The hallway I'd walked twice already now stretched longer. I counted 6 steps between the door and the fireplace before. Now it took 10. By the time I reached the stairs, rain had started to fall. The boards above my head creaked like someone walking slowly in the attic. I paused, flashlight in hand. Hello. No answer. I climbed up, each step groaning under my boots. The second floor smelled like wet stone and copper. The walls there were damp, glistening faintly, though no water leaked inside. It looked as if the house itself was sweating. At the end of the hallway was a window overlooking the ridge. Raindrops struck the glass in strange patterns, each one spreading wider than normal, as if the window were absorbing the water instead of shedding it. I touched the glass. It was warm. Outside or outside, the shape of the cabin's reflection in the puddles below shifted. The angles bent wrong, the roof line dipping lower, like the building itself was sinking. Then a loud crack echoed through the walls. I turned, flashlight catching movement. A door at the far end of the hall had opened slightly. Inside was a small bedroom, nothing but a bed frame and an old mirror leaning against the wall. Rain hammered the roof harder now, and for a second the house seemed to breathe with it, walls flexing inward with each gust. When I raised the flashlight toward the mirror, something else stared back. Not me. A silhouette stood where I should have been, its outline faint and quivering like reflection caught in water. I stumbled back, hitting the door frame. The rain outside grew heavier, deafening, as if the storm had parked directly above the ridge. The reflection tilted its head, then raised its hand to the glass. A second later, I heard the same sound behind me, a hand pressing against the rear window, from the inside. When the thunder stopped, the dripping in the kitchen started again. But this time, it wasn't water. I didn't leave the cabin that first night, though I should have. The storm outside turned into a downpour so thick I couldn't see my truck. The road back down the ridge was pure mud by then, and with no cell signal, I figured I'd wait it out until morning. I barricaded myself in the living room, started a small fire, and tried to ignore the steady dripping in the kitchen. Every time lightning flashed, the shadows in the room stretched too far across the floor, like they were reaching. The whole house creaked and moaned in rhythm with the rain. I kept hearing that slow pulse through the walls, almost like breath moving in and out of the structure. I sat there for hours, writing notes by flashlight. The air grew warm and humid, even though the fire burned low. The smell of wet soil filled the room again, heavier this time, as if something beneath the foundation had stirred. When the next thunderclap hit, the sound came from inside the walls instead of outside. It shook the floor, rattled the window panes, then faded into a low groan. I thought maybe a tree had hit the roof. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed the stairs. Halfway up, I saw the mirror again at the end of the hallway. It was lying face up now, reflecting the ceiling. I could have sworn it had been leaning against the wall before. My reflection looked wrong, longer, stretched, eyes hollow like two deep wells. Rain drummed against the roof in bursts that sounded almost deliberate. Between them I could hear whispering. Not words exactly, more like the house was mumbling through the boards. I pushed open the bedroom door. The air was thick and hot. Condensation rolled down the wallpaper in long black streaks. The wood under my boots flexed like skin stretched over something soft. Then came the dripping again. I turned toward the sound. It was coming from the ceiling this time. Water leaked from a single point, but instead of falling, it rose upward, sliding back into the wood grain. My chest tightened. The light flickered, and then I heard footsteps on the floor above me. There was no floor above me. The sound circled overhead, slow and deliberate. Then a voice, soft, genderless, just on the edge of hearing. Don't let it stop raining. I bolted down the stairs. The front door stood open, wind howling through. Rain lashed inside, soaking the floorboards. The sound made the whole cabin vibrate. I ran to shut it, but before I could, I saw something in the yard. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, blurred by rain, tall, unmoving, facing the house. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, I saw its outline clearly. Narrow body, shoulders bent backward, limbs too long, as if it had grown in the wrong direction. Then darkness again. I slammed the door, threw the bolt, and backed away. The sound of footsteps followed. Slow, wet thuds circling the porch. I aimed the flashlight toward the window, but the glass was fogged from inside. Every drop of rain that hit the roof seemed to echo in the walls, feeding something alive beneath the floor. I could feel it pulsing under me, responding to the storm like a heartbeat synced with the thunder. Then, just as suddenly, the rain stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was total. Even the fire went still, flames frozen mid-flicker, and then the smell hit. Rot and wet soil, thick enough to taste. The walls began to dry fast, the moisture pulling away until the air crackled with static. Then the house exhaled, a long, low sigh, and the boards under my feet split open. From the crack, something dark seeped upward, glistening and slow. It wasn't water, it looked like mud at first, until a pale shape pressed up through it, a hand, slick and moving. When the first drop of rain hit the roof again, that hand started clawing its way through the floorboards. The thing pushing through the floor was pale and jointed like bone soaked in oil. It twitched once, twice, then curled its fingers around the broken boards and pulled itself higher. I stumbled back, flashlight shaking. The beam caught another hand beside it, then another, 3 in total, dragging something enormous up from beneath the cabin. The sound it made wasn't a growl or a roar, but a long, wet breath. like lungs trying to fill for the first time. I ran for the door. It wouldn't open. The knob spun uselessly in my hand. The hinges groaned as if the house itself didn't want me leaving. I turned toward the window, cracked, but sealed with something thick behind the glass. The reflection of my light bounced back dull and distorted. Below me, the boards kept splitting apart. I could see shapes writhing under the planks, pressing up like something trapped inside the foundation. Rain started again, light at first, then pounding. Every drop that hit the roof made the hands move faster, stronger. The cabin's timbers creaked, responding to the rhythm of the storm. The air turned cold enough to sting my throat. Then I heard footsteps upstairs, heavy, deliberate. The floorboards above me bowed, dust sifting down like ash. I grabbed my bag, sprinted for the kitchen, and kicked the cellar door open. The stench hit first, wet earth, old rot, and something metallic. I climbed down, shining the light across the basement. It was smaller than I expected, lined with stone that looked freshly cut, and in the centre a small well. It wasn't deep, maybe 10 feet, but water churned inside it as though something beneath was breathing. The walls here were slick, pulsing faintly, and I realised with horror that they weren't stone. They were some kind of hardened flesh, veined and damp, vibrating softly with the rhythm of rainfall. A voice rose from the well. "Stay until it ends." It sounded like a chorus, a dozen different voices speaking as one. Then something splashed up, striking the ceiling and splattering black droplets across my face. I wiped them away, but they burned, cold at first, then searing. I scrambled up the stairs. The cellar door slammed before I reached the top, throwing me against the wall. Rain pounded harder, thunder rolling through the beams like a heartbeat. When I turned, the well was overflowing. Water poured out, but it didn't spread across the floor. It climbed, crawling up the walls in vertical streams. The house groaned, timbers cracking, walls flexing outward. Through the noise, I could still hear the voices chanting, pleading. "Stay until it ends, stay until it ends." The cellar light blew out. Only lightning from the cracks above illuminated what came next. A shape rose from the well, taller than the room, limbs folding out in unnatural angles. It wasn't a person, it was the house, its bones, its flesh, its heartbeat, all connected. The structure above was part of it, and I was inside its body. The roof screamed as the storm reached its peak. I grabbed a rusted pipe and swung at the cellar door until it broke open. Rainwater rushed in, flooding the steps, pulling me upward with it. When I burst through to the first floor, the living room was gone, just open space and shifting walls. Furniture floated like driftwood in a black sea. The windows looked out into nothing but swirling rain. I stumbled toward the door again. This time it opened. Outside, the storm was blinding. The house seemed taller behind me, growing as the rain poured down. Its wood pulsed with light, beating in rhythm with the thunder. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing near the tree line. When I turned back, the ridge was empty. The cabin had vanished. Only the sound of rain remained. I filed my report a week later, listed the property as condemned, structurally unsafe. The bank didn't argue, but every time it rains now, I dream of that ridge. I wake to find my floor wet, though the windows are shut, and if the storm lasts long enough. I can hear it again, wood creaking, walls shifting, the faint rasp of breath behind my bedroom wall. I escaped that house once, but the next time the rain starts, I swear the walls in my own home begin to breathe too. I've driven the Appalachian Scenic Trail for 12 years, running a small sightseeing bus for tourists who want that authentic mountain experience. The road from Bryson City to Clingman's Dome was my favourite. Quiet, winding, surrounded by endless forest. But one autumn evening, the fog rolled in lower than I'd ever seen, and the forest stopped feeling like the same place. It started normal enough. 6 passengers, mid-October, last trip of the day. I left the overlook just before dusk. The ridges were already fading behind mist, and the headlights threw weak cones of light into the grey. The tourists chatted quietly at first, taking pictures of nothing but fog. Around mile marker 21, the radio cut out. Static, then silence. My GPS froze too. Blue dot, stuck in the same spot, no matter how far I drove. The road should have started descending toward a small bridge, but it didn't. It just kept curving uphill. I thought maybe I'd missed a turn. I slowed, peering through the windshield. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten in the back. No conversation, no camera clicks. "Everyone okay back there?" I called out. No answer. I checked the rear-view mirror. The seats were empty. I hit the brakes so hard the tyres squealed. The bus rocked, headlights cutting through fog thick enough to look solid. I turned around. 6 empty seats, jackets still draped over the armrests. Phones on the floor, screens dark. I ran outside, calling into the fog. My voice felt swallowed before it reached more than a few feet. No echoes, just the sound of distant dripping, like rain falling from a high canopy that didn't exist. I thought maybe they'd stepped out when I stopped earlier at the overlook, but their things were here. All of them. Then faintly I heard something. Not footsteps, voices, whispering. Dozens of them coming from the forest around the road. It was like the sound of a crowd just before a storm, low and overlapping, impossible to pick out a single word. "Hello?" I shouted. The voices stopped. Then one of them, closer now, whispered right by my ear. "Keep driving." I spun around. Nothing there. The fog had thickened again, curling in slow spirals around the bus. I climbed back inside, locked the door, started the engine. The headlights barely reached 10 feet ahead, but I drove anyway, slow and careful. I didn't want to stay still. Every few seconds, I caught movement on the sides of the road, shapes pacing the edge of the light, not animals. Too tall, too still. The whispering started again, louder now, overlapping until it sounded like chanting. The radio flickered to life, broadcasting the same noise. My passengers' voices, repeating a phrase I couldn't understand. The road forked suddenly where it shouldn't have. The GPS still showed nothing. I picked the left side, instinct mostly. The fog there seemed thinner, almost glowing. After another half mile, I saw something ahead, a small wooden sign on the shoulder. I slowed to read it, but the words were carved so deep they looked like scratches. All I could make out was, "Do not stop beneath the fog line." A cold pulse ran through me. I checked the window. Fog pressed tight against the glass like wet fabric. Then, in the reflection, I saw faces. Not my passengers. Dozens of faces pressed against the outside, pale and silent, their mouths open but producing no sound. I floored the gas, headlights flickering as the bus surged forward. The road curved again, then straightened, and just like that, the fog broke apart. The forest reappeared. The road signs made sense again. When I pulled into the next rest stop, the bus was still empty. Only 6 wet handprints marked the inside of the windows, smeared across the glass in patterns that didn't match human fingers. When the tow driver arrived an hour later, he asked why my bus's roof was dripping. Because above the fog line, it hadn't rained all night. The mechanic at the service station found nothing wrong with the bus. Engine fine, wiring clean, even the electronics checked out. But the interior was damp, as if someone had been running a humidifier all night. The smell of wet pine clung to everything. I took the next day off. Couldn't shake the memory of those faces pressed against the glass. Every time I blinked, I saw their mouths, open, silent, waiting. By the second night, curiosity got the better of me. I told myself I'd drive that route again, no passengers this time, just to prove it was all weather distortion or fatigue. I left around dusk. Same start point, same stretch of road. The fog came back like it was waiting for me. At mile marker 21, the radio sputtered again. This time I was ready. I had my phone recording, GPS reset, and a dash cam running. But the moment I crossed that invisible line where the road started to rise, all the devices shut off at once. No power, no lights, just silence. The bus coasted in neutral. I didn't even feel the engine's vibration. It was like the whole vehicle was floating. The fog around me glowed faintly blue, the way headlights sometimes reflect off ice. Then the whispering started again. It came from the vents, from under the seats, from behind the dash. Soft, urgent, layered like wind moving through reeds. I picked out fragments this time. Don't stop. Below. The line. My skin crawled. I pressed the horn. Dead. I reached for the door lever, but the handle wouldn't budge. The air grew heavy, pressing down on my chest. The fog outside thinned for a heartbeat, revealing the outline of another bus up ahead, maybe 50 yards away. Same model, same company. Lettering on the side. Its brake lights flickered weakly through the haze. Relief hit me hard. Maybe someone else was working late. Maybe the storm had confused us both. I honked again. Nothing. Then my lights caught the back of that bus more clearly. Its rear windows were shattered inward, glass shards clinging to the frame. Something was moving inside it, shapes shifting in slow rhythm, like passengers rocking in unison. My breath fogged the windshield. The closer I rolled, the louder the whispering grew, until it wasn't whispering anymore, it was breathing. I flicked on the high beams. The bus ahead was empty, seats ripped open, ceiling warped, handprints covering every surface. Yet the shapes were still moving, beneath the floor, pressing up against the metal from underneath. I threw the bus into reverse. But the fog behind had sealed into a wall. The road was gone. The world outside the headlights had collapsed into pure white. Something struck the side of my vehicle. 3 heavy knocks that reverberated through the frame. I flinched, turning the wheel uselessly. Another knock. Louder. Then the driver's radio clicked on by itself. A woman's voice came through, calm, distant. "You've crossed below the fog line. You can't leave until it's full." "Full!" I shouted. "Full of what?" Static answered me. The windshield began to bead with moisture, not rain, not condensation. The droplets were moving against gravity, crawling upward toward the roof like insects. Every pane of glass shimmered with faces again. Hundreds this time, all staring inward. Their mouths moved silently, forming the same shape over and over. I looked down at my own reflection in the dashboard window. For a moment, it didn't move with me. Then it smiled, a slow, wrong expression that didn't belong to me. The bus engine roared back to life, jerking me forward. I didn't touch the pedal. The steering wheel spun on its own, guiding me into the fog centre. My radio crackled once more. The same woman's voice whispered, softer now, almost kind. "The road always takes back what's left behind." When I checked the dash cam later, the footage ended 30 seconds before I stopped, and the final frame showed another driver's face sitting where I should have been. I didn't remember leaving the mountain that night. The next clear thing I recall was sunlight through the windshield, my bus parked at the Bryson City Depot, engine off, every window bone dry. The time on the dashboard read 6:12 a.m. My shift log said I'd signed out 12 hours earlier. The manager asked why I'd left the emergency radio on all night. I didn't answer. I went home, scrubbed my hands 3 times, and threw the dash cam into the trash, but I couldn't stop hearing it. The whisper. At first faint, like static in my ears, then louder, circling my apartment every time fog settled outside. 3 days later, I got a call from the sheriff's office. They'd found another bus abandoned along the same stretch of road, same company, same route. Driver missing, passengers gone. Only thing left were muddy prints on the inside of the windows, too large to be human. They asked if I'd seen anything strange up there. I lied. Said no. Said fog can mess with a man's sense of direction. That night, I drove back. The fog was waiting before I even reached the first incline. It poured through the trees, thick and silver, glowing faintly in my headlights. I parked near the mile marker, engine idling, hands shaking on the wheel. The air outside tasted like metal and wet ash. I stepped into it. Flashlight cutting a small hole through the grey. The forest was silent again, too silent. Even the crickets had stopped. Then the road behind me vanished. I turned in slow circles. The fog had sealed off everything but the 10 feet around me. The bus lights flickered once, then died completely. Voices drifted out of the haze, low and rhythmic, overlapping in strange, broken phrases. Stay above, don't listen when they breathe. The words circled me like wind. I could almost feel lips brushing my ears. I ran back toward where I thought the bus was, but the shape waiting for me wasn't mine. It was the other bus, the one the sheriff said they'd found. Headlights glowing weak yellow, door open, steps slick with moisture. Inside, the air was colder. I swept my flashlight across the seats. Every row was filled. People sat perfectly still, backs straight, heads tilted toward the windows. Their faces looked normal at first. Then I realized they weren't breathing. Each one was grey, translucent, skin glistening like fog caught in flesh. A low vibration shook the floor. I backed up toward the exit, but the door slammed shut. The aisle stretched longer than it should have, the passengers' heads turning toward me in perfect unison. Their mouths opened soundlessly, and the fog outside pressed harder against the glass. Then a figure stood from the driver's seat. It looked like me, same jacket, same cap, same scar above the brow, but its eyes were hollow, empty voids, where reflection should be. It turned its head with a mechanical slowness and spoke in my voice. "You're late for the return trip." I lunged for the emergency lever and tore the door open. Fog rushed in, slamming me backward into the road. When I stood, the bus was gone. Search and rescue isn't glamorous. It's mud, darkness, and the sound of radios crackling with static while someone cries on the other end. I've worked the Blue Ridge unit for 9 years, and I've seen my share of lost hikers and busted ankles. But I'd never seen a search like the one we ran in Black Hollow. The call came just before dawn. A 12-year-old boy named Carter McKinney had wandered off from a campsite near the hollow sometime after midnight. His parents said they'd heard him talking in his sleep. Then the tent zipper opened, and he was gone. We assembled at base camp by 6. The air was heavy with fog, thick enough that our headlights looked like smears of dirty gold. The hollow lay deep between 2 ridges, a natural basin where light always seemed weaker than it should be. Our team of 5 spread out along the creek bed. Radios on, flashlights steady. The first hour was uneventful. Muddy prints, broken branches, all leading deeper into the dark. But at exactly 7:42 a.m, our signals went dead. No static, no pop, just silence. "Channel's dead," I said into the mic. No response. I tried switching frequencies, then tapping the side of the radio like that would help. Nothing. The woods around us had gone unnaturally quiet. No birds, no wind. just that kind of stillness that feels like it's listening back. I called out for Carter, voice echoing against the trees. "Carter, this is search and rescue. Call out if you can hear me." No answer. Then faintly, I thought I heard something. A child's voice, far away, repeating a single word. "Here." The others must have heard it too, because all 5 flashlights swung in the same direction. The sound came from farther down the creek, past a bend where the fog pulled thick as smoke. We moved toward it slowly, boots sinking into black mud. The water beside us shimmered faintly in the beam of my light, reflecting pale shapes that didn't match the trees above. When we reached the bend, the voice came again. Closer now. "Here." But it didn't sound right this time. It wasn't scared. It was flat, like a recording being played too slow. We stopped. Every flashlight pointed into the fog, but it was dense enough to feel solid. Something moved inside it. Something tall, gliding rather than walking. One of our team, Luis, called out, "Hey, we're with Sarah. Identify yourself." No reply. The shape froze. Then it stepped backward and was gone. The child's voice came again from the opposite direction. "Here." I spun around. The sound was behind us now, where we'd just been. My stomach dropped. The mud had changed. The footprints we'd been following were gone, filled in smooth, as if the ground had healed itself. Then, without warning, Luis's flashlight cut out. He swore under his breath and smacked it, but the beam didn't come back. A second later, Jenna's went too, then mine. The darkness that followed wasn't normal. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was like the world itself had stopped reflecting it. I waved my hand in front of my face and couldn't see the movement. My own breathing sounded distant, muffled. "Everyone stay put," I ordered. "Don't move." A whisper floated through the air, close enough that I felt the breath of it against my ear. "He's down here." I swung the dead flashlight like a club, heart hammering. Nothing. Just that endless black. When the lights finally came back, one by one, flickering weakly, we were standing in a different place. The creek was gone. No sound of water, no path behind us. Only a clearing filled with bare trees that hadn't been there before. And at the centre of it, half buried in the mud, lay a flashlight. Carter's still on, beam shining upward into the fog. Except the light didn't travel. It bent. When I picked it up, the beam didn't illuminate anything. It carved a hole in the dark that started to move on its own. The flashlight shouldn't have worked like that. Its beam didn't cut through the fog. It curved, folding inward like light caught in water. Every few seconds it twitched, shifting directions by itself. I turned it off, but the glow didn't die. It just dimmed until it was breathing, pulsing, faint, rhythmic. Louise took a step closer. "You seeing that too?" Before I could answer, the radio on his shoulder crackled alive. A child's voice came through. "Here." Static followed, then a low hum that made our teeth ache. "Carter, is that you?" I said. The voice repeated, "Here," but it was slower this time, drawn out, distorted. The pitch changed halfway through the word, dropping an octave that didn't sound human. We all stared at the glowing patch of fog where the beam twisted. The ground there looked wrong, black mud sinking and rising like something breathing beneath it. Then it opened, not wide, not like a pit, but a narrow slit in the earth, exhaling mist that reeked of rust and rain-soaked metal. Inside it was darker than the rest of the forest, a kind of absence that felt solid. Jenna said quietly, "We should mark this and leave." But the radio crackled again. Carter's voice, clear this time. "Please, help me, it's cold." That was enough to break us. We tied a line to the nearest tree, clipped our harnesses, and I went in first. Standard protocol, one in, others anchored topside. The opening sloped at a sharp angle, narrow enough that I had to crawl. The mud was cold and slick, coating my gloves. The light from the surface faded fast. After 10 feet, I turned back. The rope was gone, not snapped, gone. The tunnel behind me had sealed into smooth earth. My radio clicked with static, then silence. I switched the flashlight back on. Its beam no longer curved. It spiraled downward into an impossible distance, lighting nothing. The air grew colder, thinner, until I started seeing movement at the edge of my vision, like someone walking just ahead, always out of reach. I followed the sound of the voice deeper. It wasn't echoing anymore. It was whispering from all directions at once. Down here, hurry. The passage widened suddenly, opening into a chamber large enough that my light didn't reach the edges. The floor was water, still, black, perfectly reflective. When I crouched beside it, the surface didn't show my face. It showed the forest above, but wrong. The trees bent inward, branches pulsing like veins, and in the middle of that mirrored forest stood Carter. He looked normal, same red jacket, same flashlight clipped to his collar, but the reflection didn't match. The reflection version of him was facing me, even though the real one had his back turned. I shouted, "Carter!" He turned around. His face was pale, eyes wide, but he didn't seem afraid. "You came," he said. I took a step forward. The water didn't ripple under my boot. "We're taking you home, okay?" He nodded, but the reflection behind him didn't. The water tilted its head slowly, and the pupils expanded until the eyes went completely black. "Don't touch him," the reflection said, its mouth moving out of sync with his voice. The air vibrated like a tuning fork. The real Carter flinched and grabbed my wrist. "It doesn't want me to leave," he whispered. The reflection reached up from the surface. Its hand broke through the water without a splash. It grabbed his shoulder. He screamed, not from pain, but from the sound. His voice split into two, one echoing, one deep and hollow. I pulled him free, wrenching him upward, and the light from my flashlight burst outward like a flare. For a second, I saw the chamber clearly. Thousands of faces pressed into the walls, pale and half-formed, eyes open but empty. Then the light died. When I came to, I was back at the surface, Carter beside me, breathing. But the flashlight in his hand was still glowing, even though the batteries were gone. Carter was alive when we found him, but something in him was wrong. His pulse was steady, his breathing shallow, but his eyes didn't track movement. They stayed locked on the flashlight clutched to his chest, the one that still glowed faintly, even after I'd taken the batteries out. We got him back to base camp by sunrise. The fog had lifted, yet the air still felt heavy, thick, like the hollow's darkness had followed us up. The medics checked him, said he was in shock. He didn't respond to questions. He didn't blink. I told the team what happened below, at least the parts I could make sense of. The sealed tunnel, the reflection, the faces in the walls. Luis didn't believe me. Jenna didn't say a word. She just kept glancing at Carter's flashlight like it was a live grenade. By mid-morning, the fog rolled back in, crawling low through the camp like smoke. It shouldn't have formed that fast, not with the temperature rising, but there it was, spreading from the hollow itself. Radios started cutting out again. One of the tents collapsed as if pulled downward from beneath. Then Carter started humming. At first it was soft, tuneless. Then it took on rhythm, steady, pulsing, the same frequency the fog made when it moved. His head tilted toward the hollow, mouth twitching like he was trying to form words. "Carter," I said carefully, crouching in front of him. "You need to stay with us, okay?" His eyes flicked to mine for the first time all morning. His voice came out cracked, layered, like two people speaking at once. "It's not dark down there anymore." Before I could react, he bolted. straight toward the ridge trail. We ran after him, the fog tightening around us, until visibility dropped to nothing. I could barely see the ground, just the faint shape of Carter's jacket ahead. He didn't slow. When we reached the clearing at the base of the hollow, I stopped short. The landscape had changed. The creek was gone again, replaced by dry, cracked soil stretching out where water used to run. At the centre, a single shaft of light rose from the earth, the same glow that had pulsed inside his flashlight. Carter ran straight into it. I lunged, catching his arm just as he reached the centre. His skin was freezing cold. "You can't go back," I yelled. He turned, eyes black from edge to edge. "It doesn't want me, it wants you." The ground gave way beneath us. The light swallowed everything. When I woke up, I was alone. The hollow was quiet. The fog had cleared again, but the light remained, a faint line running through the soil like a buried filament. My radio clicked twice, then Carter's voice whispered through the static. "Stay until it ends." I stumbled back toward camp, but the trail didn't match the map anymore. The trees were wrong. Every few steps the light shifted, sometimes behind me, sometimes under my boots, sometimes far ahead, like a path leading me somewhere I didn't want to go. When I finally reached the ridgeline, the sun was setting, but it didn't look right. The light bent around the horizon like it was curving through water. The fog began rising again, slow and steady, as if drawn to the light bleeding from the hollow below. Jenna and Luis were gone. Camp empty. Radios dead. Only Carter's flashlight sat on the table, still glowing softly. I picked it up. The light was warm in my hand now, alive, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. When I turned it toward the trees, the shadows moved away, as if afraid. But when I turned it toward the hollow, the beam bent downward and vanished. Now, every rescue we run near that place, the fog comes early. Batteries die. Maps change. And if the search goes long enough, we start hearing that humming again. The new recruits call it superstition, but the veterans know better. We don't go into Black Hollow after dark, because down there, light doesn't die, it waits. And when the fog creeps up the ridge at night, we hear Carter's voice on every dead radio whispering, "Your turn." I've worked highway maintenance in Western Virginia for 15 years. My job's simple: inspect the asphalt, replace damaged guardrails, keep the roads safe for everyone else. You get used to the quiet out here. Endless trees, few cars, wind always sounding like water through the branches. Last March, dispatch sent me a work order to replace a missing mile marker on Route 64, about 12 miles past Big Levels. Just a standard reflective sign, nothing special. The report said it had gone missing during the last storm, probably hit by a fallen branch. The day I went out there, the weather was perfect. Cold air, blue sky, the kind of calm that makes you forget winter's still clinging to the mountains. I pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing, and got to work. The old post was snapped clean off at the base, not splintered, sliced, like someone had taken a saw to it. The soil around it was soft and dark, and something about it smelled off. Not rot, sweeter, almost metallic. I dug a new hole, set the replacement, bolted it in, packed the dirt, and took the mandatory photo for the record. As I was loading my tools, the radio in my truck buzzed with static. I leaned in, thinking dispatch was calling. The voice that came through wasn't anyone I knew. "Don't put it back," it said, then silence. I tried to call in, but the radio was dead. Checked my phone, no signal. I told myself it was interference from the ridge and finished cleaning up. When I started the engine, the GPS flickered. The map showed my position wrong, 50 miles north, on a section of highway that didn't exist. The screen glitched, lines bending like the map itself was twisting. I shut it off and drove back toward the main road. A mile down, I passed the marker I'd just installed. The same number, same post. That stopped me cold. I checked the odometer, no mistake. I'd driven exactly 1 mile, yet there it was again. Mile 184. Same angle, same scratch on the reflective plate. I thought maybe I'd looped back somehow, though there's no way that stretch connects to itself. Still, I pulled over again to check. Walked up to the marker, flashlight in hand, even though it was still daylight. The soil at the base was wet, freshly disturbed. My boot sank half an inch into it. I reached down to touch the bolt and realized the ground was warm. Not sun-warmed, body-warm. That smell returned. Thicker now, sharp and coppery. The radio in the truck crackled again, same voice whispering. "You put it back." My chest went tight. I yanked the sign out of the dirt entirely, tossed it into the truck bed, and got behind the wheel. Gravel sprayed as I turned around. I drove fast, faster than I should have on that road. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the asphalt. When I finally reached the next junction, I slowed to catch my breath. And then I saw it again. The sign, same one, same number, 184, standing perfectly upright on the shoulder. I hadn't stopped, I hadn't turned. But there it was, glowing faintly under the fading light, like it had never been touched. That's when I noticed something else. The mile markers ahead didn't make sense. The numbers started counting backward. 183, 184, 185. Each one perfectly clean, each one newer than the last. By the time I hit 179, the radio buzzed again. "Keep driving," the voice said, softer this time. "You'll make it back." I glanced in the mirror, and my blood ran cold. The road behind me was gone. Only darkness stretched where I'd come from, swallowing the pavement whole. When the headlights hit the next marker, the number wasn't 178. It was 184 again. And this time, the sign was dripping. The sign was wet, glistening under my headlights, like it had just been pulled from deep water. I slowed, window cracked halfway down. The smell that came through wasn't rain or mud. It was iron, sharp and thick. I killed the engine and stepped out. Silence, no wind, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you hear your own pulse. I walked toward the marker, flashlight in hand. The beam caught streaks running down the reflective plate. The liquid wasn't water, too dark, too viscous. It clung to the edges of the number like ink that refused to dry. I reached out without thinking, fingertips hovering inches from the surface. The sign vibrated, a faint tremor that moved through the metal into my bones. The reflective coating rippled. My own reflection shimmered back at me, delayed by half a second, as if it needed to remember how to mimic me. I jerked my hand away. The radio in the truck hissed, then cut through the stillness. "You're almost there," said the voice. I froze. "Who is this?" The reply came, closer, the sound vibrating through the air instead of the speakers. "You've been here before." A cold wave of nausea rolled through me. I sprinted back to the truck and slammed the door, fumbling for the ignition. When the headlights flared on, the beam caught dozens of mile markers lining both sides of the road. Every one of them numbered 184. They stretched ahead for miles, vanishing into the fog. I floored the gas. The markers blurred past, identical. The same angle, the same scratches. My GPS blinked to life again, showing a straight road with no intersections and no destination point. The digital compass spun uselessly. After maybe 15 minutes, I noticed something wrong. The odometer wasn't changing. I was driving fast, but the digits stayed frozen. Then the engine temperature gauge spiked red. Steam hissed from under the hood. I pulled over, slammed it in park, and popped the latch. When I stepped out, the air hit me, thick, hot, suffocating. The fog pulsed faintly like it had lungs. Something dripped onto my arm. I looked up. The sign above the ditch leaned slightly toward me, and a single drop of that dark liquid fell from its edge. It hissed when it hit my sleeve, eating through the fabric like acid. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, slow, wet, rhythmic. I turned, beam slicing across the shoulder. A figure stood in the middle of the lane, tall, thin, wearing what looked like my reflective vest. I couldn't see its face. The flashlight's beam bent around it, refusing to land. It lifted its arm and pointed toward the next sign. "Keep driving," it said in my own voice. The fog surged, swallowing the space between us. I jumped back into the cab, engine whining as I turned the key. It roared to life. The figure didn't move. I drove straight through it. There was resistance, like hitting a curtain made of water. The windshield went black for a second. When it cleared, the figure was gone, but the entire inside of the truck smelled like ozone and rust. The odometer started counting again, but backward. 5 miles, 4.2, 3.1. Every number that ticked down, the fog grew thicker. I watched the mile markers out the window as I passed. The numbers no longer made sense. Scribbled symbols burned into the reflective paint, changing every time my lights hit them. Then my radio came alive one last time, but the voice wasn't whispering anymore. It was screaming. "Turn it back! You weren't supposed to mark it." I hit the brakes. The sound cut off. Outside, the nearest sign gleamed bright white, untouched, brand new. But carved into the metal with something jagged was a single word: "Return." When I looked down at the dirt around the post, there were tire tracks, mine, half buried under the same black liquid I'd seen dripping from the sign. The dirt around that post was soft, as if something had been moving under it. The liquid pooled in the tread marks, shimmered faintly under my headlights, reflecting the number 184 back at me over and over until it filled the entire puddle. My breath came out white, even though the night wasn't cold. The air had that metallic taste again, heavy and wet, like standing too close to a transformer in the rain. I got back in the truck, slammed the door, and sat still long enough to feel the vibration through the seat, steady, pulsing, like a heartbeat coming from the ground. The road behind me was gone again. The mirrors showed nothing, no reflection of light, no trace of the world I'd left. Only the glow of the marker standing in the fog, bright as a headlight aimed straight into my skull. I started the truck and drove forward, slow this time. The numbers on the mile markers stopped changing entirely, just 184, repeating endlessly like a stutter in reality. After the 5th one, the radio clicked alive again. The voice was lower now, distorted, broken by static. "You can't take it back. It remembers." I didn't answer. I turned the volume down to 0, but the voice kept speaking, still clear, even with the radio off. "You put it where it didn't belong. Now the road has to fix itself." I pressed harder on the gas. The asphalt ahead shimmered in waves, reflecting light that didn't come from my truck. My headlights dimmed, then flared, then dimmed again. The next sign wasn't upright anymore. It was bent backward over the ditch, like something had grabbed it and twisted until the post tore apart. The reflective face still pointed toward the road, and in it, my own headlights looked wrong. They flickered a half-second behind the real ones. When I passed, my reflection in the glass turned its head to look back at me. I kept driving. The air inside the cab grew hotter by the mile, fogging the windows from the inside. Sweat dripped down my neck, even though the heater was off. Somewhere in the distance, a low hum started, a vibration rising from beneath the pavement. The steering wheel twitched in my hands, pulling left even though the road was straight. That's when I saw the figure again, standing on the shoulder, arm outstretched, pointing. Same vest, same stance. I drove past it, refusing to look directly, but when I checked the mirror, it was standing closer. Now at the edge of my taillight glow, the odometer ticked to 0, then the numbers blinked once and started climbing again. I slammed the brakes. Gravel sprayed across the shoulder. The world outside didn't react. Even the fog didn't stir. When I stepped out, the silence felt like pressure against my skull. The mile marker beside me was glowing bright enough to light the surrounding trees. Something had been carved into its metal face with deep, uneven strokes. The letters were wet, fresh. Your exit is a circle. I backed away. The road ahead wasn't paved anymore. It looked soft, black, rippling like tar left too long in the sun. The glow from the markers reflected off it, making the surface seem alive. From somewhere deep under the asphalt came a slow, deliberate scraping. It moved toward me, steady, measured, like something dragging metal claws through stone. The next lightning flash revealed dozens of mile markers standing far into the forest, half sunk, tilted at odd angles. The reflection of their numbers flickered independently, pulsing like the rhythm of a dying engine. I ran for the truck. When I turned the key, it caught immediately, but the fuel gauge was full again, the odometer reset, the clock flashing 12 o'clock. I pulled onto the road and drove until dawn, or what I thought was dawn. The fog never lifted. When the fuel finally ran dry, I coasted to a stop beside another mile marker. The same number, the same smell. I left the keys in the ignition and started walking. The last thing I remember is seeing tyre tracks ahead of me in the fog, mine looping forward into the mist. And when I reached the next sign, it already had my name etched into the metal, right beneath mile 184. I manage a wildlife research station tucked high in the Allegheny foothills, part of a federal monitoring program, tracking bear migration and habitat patterns. We use a network of motion-triggered cameras, hundreds of them, scattered through 30 square miles of remote forest. They run all night, all seasons, uploading every image to a central server through a satellite uplink. I've spent years reviewing that data, one photo at a time. Last winter, the uploads began to change. It started with a small anomaly, multiple cameras pinging at the exact same second. Normally, you'd expect random intervals. A deer here, wind-triggered movement there. But on February the 4th, at 03:13:27, every single unit, 212 cameras, triggered at once. I thought it was a network glitch. Power surge, maybe. The kind of hiccup that happens when the satellite connection desyncs. Still, I opened the feed logs. Each file was labelled cleanly, timestamps aligned perfectly, no signs of corruption. I clicked the first image. It showed the forest at night, trees bending under snow. Nothing unusual. I moved to the next. Same timestamp, same frame, different angle. Across all 212 photos, there was no movement, no animal, no wind blur, nothing. Just still, frozen woods. But in the exact center of every frame, regardless of camera orientation, stood the same faint shape. A human silhouette. I zoomed in. The outline was barely visible, distorted by static. No face, no clothing details, just a tall, upright figure. The oddest part was that the silhouette faced away from every camera. I tried cross-referencing GPS coordinates. The angles didn't make sense. To appear in the center of each image, that figure would have needed to stand in 212 different places at once. I spent the next 2 hours scrubbing the footage. The figure didn't move. No sign of tampering, no digital overlay. The metadata confirmed each unit captured a unique shot at that exact second. At dawn, I hiked to one of the closest camera sites, Unit 47, perched near an old ravine. Snow fell hard, muffling sound. The woods were heavy and still. The camera was intact, lens clean, battery solid. I checked the SD card. It matched the uploaded file perfectly, but on the ground beneath the tripod, the snow was melted. A perfect circle about 6 feet wide, still steaming faintly in the freezing air. I crouched down, touched the edge of the melted snow. It wasn't warm anymore, just damp. The soil beneath it was black, almost charred. I radioed the station. "Hey, anyone log maintenance out here last night?" Silence. Then, after a few seconds, my tech assistant, Neil, answered. "Nope, you're the only one with clearance north of Sector 3. I hesitated. "Did we ever get any human detections last night?" Neil paused, his voice lower now. "That's the weird part, boss. Every camera flagged the same object as non-biological motion." Meaning what? Meaning the software didn't recognize it as a living thing. By the time I got back to the station, the system had flagged another batch, all captured at 03:13:27, just like before, but these were from archived days, going back months. Somehow, the timestamp had changed itself in the records. Neil ran a diagnostic. Looks like they relabeled automatically, the codes rewriting the logs. He looked up, pale. "It's not a virus, it's running from the cameras themselves." We disconnected the uplink, isolated the drives. For a while, that stopped it, until midnight hit, and every monitor in the station flickered on by itself. 212 live feeds, all showing the forest at night. No wind, no snow, just that same figure standing in the center of every frame, closer now, the outline sharper. Then one camera feed twitched. Unit 47. The figure turned around. When it faced the lens, every camera across the network went black, except the one mounted inside the station. The only camera left broadcasting that night was the one inside the station. It faced the equipment racks and the entry door. When the others went black, its feed flickered, then brightened. In the center of the frame, just beyond the window, something stood in the snow. It wasn't a trick of the light. It had the same silhouette as before, tall, thin, perfectly still. The glass fogged from the outside as though it was breathing against it. Neil froze beside me. "It can't be that close." I stepped toward the window, flashlight raised, but the beam didn't reach more than a few feet. The fog outside seemed solid, like it swallowed the light whole. Then the station lights dimmed, flickered, and went out. The monitors glowed on backup power. Every screen showed static except one, Unit 47's feed. Its camera pointed toward the ravine, the same clearing I'd visited earlier that day. But now there was movement. Something was walking through the trees, slow and deliberate, dragging its hand along the trunks. Wherever it touched, the bark darkened and steamed. "Kill the feed," Neil said. I pulled the main breaker. The screens went black, but a second later they turned back on by themselves. This time there was no figure, just the number 03:13:27 flashing across every display in perfect sync. Neil backed away. "It's recording us." I didn't argue. We left the control room and moved down to the lower bay where the servers were stored. The hum from the machines was wrong. Off-tempo, uneven, as though each unit had its own heartbeat. When we opened the access panel, heat poured out. The air smelled like ozone and wet metal. The server lights pulsed in rhythm with that same timestamp pattern. 3 flashes, pause, 1 flash, pause, 3 again. I disconnected the power cable. The machines stayed on. Neil swore under his breath. "They're drawing current from the external relays. That shouldn't even be possible." Something shifted above us. Slow, dragging footsteps across the ceiling tiles. I shone the flashlight up. The dust overhead was disturbed, like someone had been crawling on the hands and knees across the panels. One of the tiles flexed slightly, creaking under invisible weight. "Someone's in the crawl space," I whispered. Neil grabbed a wrench from the tool bench and climbed onto the desk. He pushed the tile up an inch. peered inside and froze. His voice came out barely audible. "It's watching us through the vents." I caught a glimpse before the tile dropped back down. An eye, wide and glossy, reflecting the monitor light. It wasn't human. The iris rippled like oil on water, the pupil contracting sideways. Neil jumped down. "We're leaving. Now." We headed for the exit, but the electronic lock refused to disengage. The emergency latch was dead too. Outside, the snow started again, thick flakes hitting the glass with slow, deliberate taps. The radio on the wall hissed to life, 031327. Then a voice, ours, both of us, a perfect replay. "Kill the feed. Kill the feed." The words looped back, over and over. I pulled the radio from its mount, slammed it onto the counter, but it kept broadcasting, even without power. The sound grew deeper, layered, until it wasn't voices anymore. It was a low mechanical moan, vibrating through the walls. The temperature dropped fast. Frost crawled up the inside of the windows, sketching shapes that looked like letters. Neil leaned close. His breath clouded against the glass. "It's writing." The words spelled out one phrase, repeated again and again. "We're already recorded." Every screen lit back up. Each feed showed a live view of the control room. Except in every frame, we were standing perfectly still, months older, clothes torn, skin pale, eyes blank. Neil whispered, "Those are time-stamped tomorrow." When the clock on the wall clicked over to 031327, the figures on the screens began to move. The versions of us on the screens didn't move right. The footage wasn't sped up or reversed, just wrong, frames missing. Every motion jerking a fraction behind reality. Neil reached toward one monitor, but the moment his hand came close, static crawled across the glass. Our reflections inside the screens turned to face us in perfect sync. Then both of them smiled. I yanked the main breaker again. The station plunged into darkness. The hum of the servers faded, replaced by a deep electrical drone that seemed to rise from beneath the floor. Outside, the snow glowed faintly blue under the emergency lights, each flake falling too slow, like time had thickened. Neil pulled at the door handle. "It's unlocked." The cold hit us instantly. Clean, sterile, but heavy with the smell of wet metal. We stepped outside into the clearing. The sky overhead had no stars, only that faint, even light seeping from nowhere. I turned back toward the building. The windows were glowing, not from inside, but from within the glass itself, like the structure was filled with liquid light. Neil pointed toward the tree line. "Look," dozens of cameras hung from the branches, strung together with their own cables, wires pulsing like veins. Some were ours, same model, same serial numbers, but others looked older, bulkier, coated in frost. Their lenses all pointed toward us. "Were these installed before we—" Neil began, but stopped. One by one, every lens opened, with a faint mechanical click. Then, all at once, every red indicator light turned on. The sound that followed wasn't mechanical. It was breath, hundreds of slow inhales echoing from the forest. We backed up toward the truck. The cameras turned with us, tracking our movements perfectly. I threw open the door and shoved the keys into the ignition. The headlights flared, cutting through the fog, and revealed what stood just beyond the edge of the light. Rows of figures, dozens of them, every one shaped like a person, but slightly blurred. As if filmed through water. They didn't walk. They advanced by flickering, shifting closer each second, skipping frames like corrupted video. "Get in!" I shouted. Neil jumped inside, slammed the door. I floored the gas. The tires spun on the icy gravel, then caught. The truck lurched forward, fishtailing down the service road. In the rearview mirror, I saw the station shrinking behind us. The figures didn't follow physically, they just appeared closer each time I blinked, as though the world itself was skipping. The radio crackled. 3:13:27, it whispered. Playback complete. Static drowned it out. We didn't stop driving until we hit the highway. My phone finally found a signal. The time read 13:27. We'd left nearly 40 minutes earlier. Neil exhaled shakily. That's impossible. I didn't answer. The dashboard clock froze. The engine gauge pulsed once, then died. Every electrical component shut off at the same time. The truck coasted to a stop. Outside, the air shimmered. The road ahead blurred. Heat haze ripples spreading outward until the forest on both sides distorted like a reflection on disturbed water. Neil opened his door, leaning out to look. You hear that? It was faint at first, like distant rainfall, but the rhythm was familiar. A soft mechanical click, followed by a pause. The sound of motion-triggered shutters going off, one after another. Hundreds of them. The world flashed white for a second. When it cleared, we weren't on the highway anymore. We were parked in front of the research station. The truck was coated in frost. The cameras in the trees still glowed red, pulsing in unison. Neil grabbed my shoulder. His voice shook. Look at the windshield. Condensation had formed across the glass, smeared by something dragging its fingers down from the roof. 5 marks, human-sized, perfectly even. On the inside of the glass, faint letters appeared as the frost melted away. We've been watching. The radio clicked once more, our own voices echoing back in perfect clarity, whispering from somewhere in the static. Smile for the cameras. They pulled our footage from the cloud weeks later, but in the last frame, the station isn't empty. 2 men still sit inside, frozen mid-breath, forever staring at the screens. The limestone quarry outside Boone had been closed for decades before they reopened it for seasonal maintenance work. I signed on that summer mostly for the paycheck. Overnight watch shifts, easy hours, good money. The place sat 5 miles from the nearest road, hidden behind a curtain of pine and shale cliffs. It wasn't supposed to be dangerous. The first week went like smooth. My job was simple: patrol the perimeter, make sure the pumps kept the drainage pit from flooding, and check the floodlights every few hours. The quarry looked like a giant bowl carved into the earth, sheer rock walls plunging down 100 feet. The floodlights bathed everything in harsh yellow, turning the stone pale and featureless. On my 5th night, something changed. Halfway through the shift, one of the lights on the north wall blinked out, then another. Farther along. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down the access path, gravel crunching under my boots. The air was still, no wind, no bugs, just the sound of dripping water echoing off the rock. When I reached the first dead light, I looked up at the pole. The bulb hadn't shattered, it was simply unscrewed. I checked the housing, half expecting to find a prank or some sign of vandalism. Nothing. The socket was warm to the touch, like it had just been on. That's when I noticed movement at the bottom of the quarry. At first I thought it was a trick of shadow, but then I saw him, someone walking slowly across the drained pit. A man, tall and thin, wearing work coveralls like ours. No helmet, no gear. "Hey!" I shouted down. My voice bounced off the stone. No answer. I clicked the radio. "Control, you got anyone on site tonight?" Static. The man stopped walking. He looked up at me, head tilted slightly. I aimed the flashlight down, but the beam caught only the pale slope of his face. His eyes glinted like wet stone. I blinked. And he was gone. Not vanished in the cinematic way, just not there anymore. 1 second he stood in the open pit, the next it was empty rock and mud. I stayed frozen until my radio came back to life, crackling with half words and static. I caught only fragments. North section, check again. When I turned around, the floodlight I'd just inspected flickered back on. Then the next one, and the next. until every bulb in the quarry glared at once. Brighter than I'd ever seen, the light poured across the stone, too white to look at. My shadow stretched long behind me, bending strangely against the rock. Then, deep below, something moved again. Another shape crossing through the glare. This time, it wasn't one man. It was several. Their silhouettes shifted under the blinding light, each walking in the same slow, deliberate stride. I counted 6, maybe 7. None of them cast shadows. The radio hissed again, louder now, a voice fighting through the noise. "Do not engage. Leave the area immediately." It was the supervisor, Jenkins. "Who's down there?" I shouted. The line went dead. I started backing up the slope, keeping my light on the pit. The figures stopped moving. For a long moment, they stood perfectly still. Then, in unison, every floodlight in the quarry turned to face me. The lamps groaned as their mounts shifted, metal scraping against metal, until the beams formed a perfect ring out around the access path. The heat was instant, oppressive, like standing under a sun that had been waiting just for me. I covered my eyes and stumbled backward. When the lights finally snapped off all at once, the darkness that followed felt alive, thick, breathing, full of quiet movement. Something whispered from the pit, too low to understand, carried up by the echoing walls. I forced myself back to the truck and slammed the door. The headlights flickered on by themselves, illuminating the quarry entrance. Someone stood there now, same coveralls, same shape, except this time he was smiling. When I hit the ignition, every light in the quarry came back on, and the figure was standing right outside my driver's side window. The face outside my window wasn't quite human. I only saw it for a second before the floodlights died again, but that was enough. The features were too symmetrical. The smile stretched just a little too wide, and the skin looked like wet limestone under thin paper. I threw the truck in reverse, tires grinding against the gravel. The headlights flickered twice, then failed completely. The engine sputtered, coughed, and went silent. I was alone with the dark and the echo of dripping water. When my eyes adjusted, I realized something. The figure wasn't there anymore, but faint footprints led away from the truck, down toward the bottom of the quarry. I could have left right then, hiked back to the gate, called in a malfunction report, and gone home. But there's a strange kind of pride in this job. You don't walk away just because the dark feels wrong. I grabbed my flashlight, the one with the reinforced casing, and started following the prints. The beam stretched maybe 15 feet ahead, cutting through the dust and mist hanging low over the pit. Each step echoed too long, the sound bouncing off the rock walls in strange directions. The quarry floor was slick with thin mud, almost like something had been bleeding through from underneath. I found the floodlight control box half buried at the bottom. The main switch snapped clean in two. The breaker panel beside it was dented inward, like someone had struck it with a sledgehammer. Then my radio crackled again. No voice, just static interspersed with faint whispers. It wasn't language, not really, just syllables that almost made sense. I turned in a slow circle, sweeping the light across the rock face. My beam landed on something white. It was a helmet. Company issue. It lay halfway submerged in the mud, cracked down the middle. When I pulled it free, I found a name tag still attached. Collins. Collins had been part of the previous maintenance crew before the shutdown last fall. I remembered his file. Missing, presumed walked off the job. The static on the radio grew louder, now mixed with rhythmic tapping like metal striking stone. The same pattern over and over. 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. I started toward the sound. The fog thickened near the far wall, dense enough that the beam bent against it. The tapping grew louder, echoing around me until I couldn't tell which direction it came from. When I reached the center of the pit, I saw what had been hidden under the runoff water all along. A fissure, narrow, vertical, wide enough for a man to squeeze through. It went straight into the rock. The tapping stopped. The radio hissed. Then a voice came through, clear this time. Maintenance record. Unit 6 reporting. Floodlight replacement complete. My stomach turned. That voice wasn't Collins. It was mine. The fissure exhaled a wave of cold air. I stepped back, flashlight shaking in my grip. The light caught something just inside the crack. Fingers. Pale, motionless, pressed against the edge of the rock as if someone was pushing from the other side. The surface shifted. The hand flexed, curled, then withdrew. I ran. The flashlight beam jittered across the walls, catching glimpses of movement all around. Reflections that weren't mine. Men in coveralls walking just outside the reach of light, their faces smooth and unbroken, like masks carved from chalk. When I reached the truck, the door was open. The radio still hissed softly, whispering. I shut it off, killed the battery, and sat there until the sun started to rise. From up top, the quarry looked normal again. No lights, no figures, no sign I'd even gone down. But when I climbed into the truck to leave, something was written on the inside of the windshield in faint grey dust. Unit 7, active. When I checked the company roster later that day, there was no Unit 7, and yet, beside my name, the system showed my status as reassigned. I didn't sleep after that shift. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw that pale hand pushing through the fissure. The air from that crack was cold enough to burn, yet somehow it smelled faintly of wet clay, like freshly broken stone. When the sun came up, I drove straight to headquarters, slammed my ID on Jenkins' desk, and told him I was done. He looked at me like I'd grown another head. "You're not on the schedule anymore," he said. That froze me. "What do you mean?" "I'm assigned to the Boone Quarry rotation." Jenkins frowned, tapping his monitor. "Not according to the system. Says you transferred to a special unit last night, Unit 7. He spun the screen around. My employee record was stamped with a red banner. Active. Remote site access granted. I said, "You know there is no Unit 7. He just shrugged. "Maybe a software error. Happens all the time." But his eyes didn't meet mine. That night, I decided to go back. I needed proof, photos, evidence, anything. I figured if I could show someone what was happening down there, maybe they'd shut the place down for good. The gate lock was gone when I arrived. The chain still hung there, but the padlock was melted, metal fused into a puddle on the ground. I parked near the entrance, killed the engine, and listened. The quarry hummed. It wasn't wind or machinery, it was vibration, low and constant, deep in the stone, like something alive was breathing beneath the pit. I descended slowly, flashlight in one hand, camera slung around my neck. The floodlights were on again, every single one blazing white. But the power grid had been disconnected weeks earlier. The fissure was wider now, stretching halfway across the quarry floor. The mud around it steamed. When I leaned close, the air shimmered like heat above asphalt. Then I heard movement. Boots, crunching gravel behind me. "Hey," I said without turning. "This site's closed." No response. I turned the flashlight around. A man in coveralls stood 10 feet away, head tilted, vase hidden under a low-brimmed helmet. His uniform was clean, too clean for a work site. On his chest was a patch I'd never seen before, Unit 7 stitched in white thread. "Who are you?" I asked. He didn't speak. He just pointed toward the fissure. The radio on my belt came alive. Static burst through, followed by Jenkins' voice. "Unit 7, status report." The man in front of me reached for his belt and lifted a radio identical to mine. "Maintenance complete," he said in my voice. My skin went cold. I dropped the flashlight. Its beam spun across the stone, catching more figures emerging from the fog. Half a dozen of them, all wearing the same patch, all identical in height, build, and stance. Each carried a tool identical to mine. Each had my face. I stumbled backward toward the incline, but the ground trembled underfoot. The fissure split wider with a grinding roar, revealing blackness deeper than the floodlights could reach. Something massive shifted inside it, a ripple of movement that made the air itself bend. One of the copies stepped closer. "The work isn't finished," it said, mouth moving half a beat behind the words. "We need more light." They all turned their heads in perfect unison toward the floodlight poles. As one, they lifted their tools, my tools, and began unscrewing the bulbs. Each light went out with a pop. Darkness rolled upward like smoke, swallowing everything except the glow from the fissure. When the last light died, I ran. The climb out of the quarry felt endless. Behind me, the sound of metal twisting filled the air, followed by the dull hum of machinery coming online again. When I reached the ridge, I looked back one last time. The pit glowed faintly from within, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. I don't remember driving home. I just remember sitting in my driveway at dawn, staring at the word etched into the dust on my windshield, maintenance complete. A week later, the company files listed Unit 7 as fully operational, with my employee photo beside every name. The old railway tunnel outside Caldwell was one of those local legends people whispered about in bars and gas stations. It was built in the 1890s, sealed in the 1950s after a collapse that killed 6 workers, and left to rot ever since. Nobody went near it, at least nobody with sense. But I'm not most people. I'm part of the county's historical preservation group, and when a contractor found the tunnel entrance during survey work, I volunteered to document it. We'd been trying to restore lost industrial sites, and this one was too significant to ignore. The entrance sat at the base of a ridge where the forest turned to shale and moss-covered stone. Decades of mudslides had nearly buried the archway. The old iron gate was twisted and sealed by rust. Someone had painted closed permanently across the top in faded red, but I could still see the original engravings. Hollow Creek Line, 1893. The air was wrong the moment I stepped near it. Cold, yes, but not fresh. It smelled like wet iron and long dead wood. My partner, Lorna, helped me set up the floodlight and camera tripod. "You sure this is safe?" she asked. "It's sealed," I said. "We're just taking exterior photos." I took the first few shots. Arches, rails, moss growth. The flash caught flecks of ice in the air that shouldn't have been there. Then I noticed something on the gate. A small hole at the base, round and clean, like it had been drilled through from the inside. "Probably erosion," I muttered. When I crouched to photograph it, a current of cold air rushed out, carrying a faint hiss like someone exhaling. Lorna stepped back. "Did you feel that?" I nodded. "Probably pressure change." But the light on her tripod flickered once, then again. The bulb wasn't failing. It was dimming in rhythm, almost like it was responding to something. I leaned close to the hole. The inside of the tunnel was pitch black, no reflection, no end. I called out just to test the echo. "Hello!" The sound came back flat, delayed by several seconds. I turned to Lorna. "You hear that?" Her face had gone pale. That wasn't an echo. The reply wasn't a direct reflection of my voice. It was slower, drawn out, warped. "Hello." We froze. The gate shifted slightly, metal grinding against stone. Dust fell from the arch. Then another gust of air blew out, stronger this time, carrying the same sound again, but now it was layered, like several voices speaking at once. Lorna snapped, "We're done," and started packing up. I couldn't move. Something about that noise felt alive. Old, too human to dismiss as wind. The hole at the base widened with a dry crack, flakes of rust falling away. A faint glow pulsed inside, not bright, just a soft orange shimmer that reminded me of firelight through fog. "Get the camera," I said. She shook her head. "We're leaving, now." The glow pulsed again, timed with the flicker of the floodlight. The air temperature dropped so sharply my breath hung in white clouds. The gate groaned once more, and something inside the tunnel shifted. A scraping of metal on stone, steady and slow. The floodlight burst with a pop. Darkness swallowed the ridge. I turned on my headlamp, beam shaking as I aimed it at the tunnel. The glow was gone, replaced by pure black. But I could hear movement now. Footsteps, deliberate, echoing from deep within. "Someone's in there," I said, voice cracking. Lorna didn't respond. She was staring past me. When I turned, I saw the mudslide path we'd walked up was empty. Our tire tracks gone, even though we'd only been there an hour. She whispered, "It doesn't want us to leave." The gate rattled violently, chains clattering like bones. The hole flared orange again. Then, from the dark inside, a voice spoke clearly this time. "Help us open it." When I stepped back, I realized my flashlight beam wasn't aimed at the tunnel anymore. It was reflecting off something behind the gate that was already watching us. We left the ridge that night without speaking. The lights from the truck looked weaker than usual, as though the fog itself was eating them. Neither of us said what we both heard in that last echo, but it followed us down the road, slow tapping. like nails against the truck bed. I didn't sleep. The camera footage kept replaying in my head, that orange glow behind the gate. By morning, I convinced myself it had to be natural gas or phosphorescence from decayed rock. Rational explanations. I told Lorna we'd go back, just once, to collect the equipment we'd left behind. She agreed on one condition. We wouldn't step past the gate. When we arrived, the air was heavier, wet enough to taste. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees from the surrounding forest. Our floodlight cables still lay across the mud, but the bulbs had shattered. The gate itself looked different, its rusted links twisted tighter, almost fused, as if the metal had melted in the cold. The hole at the base was wider, not from collapse, cleaner, perfectly round, maybe 8 inches across, with jagged metal curling outward like something had pushed through. I crouched beside it. That wasn't like this last night. Lorna didn't answer. She was staring at the archway. Listen. A faint hum rose from within the tunnel. Not mechanical, human. It sounded like distant voices singing a work chant, deep and rhythmic, the kind miners used to keep time with their picks. It shouldn't have been possible. The tunnel was sealed solid beyond the gate. The hum built slowly, layers folding over one another until it became something else. Words. Pull the line, hold the beam, keep the light. The melody cracked into static, like an old recording disintegrating. The gate vibrated under my hand, cold enough to burn. Then came the sound of metal striking rock. 1 hit, 2, 3. Each impact echoed longer than the last. I stepped back. They're working down there. Lorna's voice trembled. They're dead. The orange light returned, pulsing deep within the tunnel. It wasn't firelight. It was rhythmic, mechanical, like the steady throb of molten metal. The air pressure shifted, drawing us closer. My ears popped. Then something scraped across the inside of the gate. Not claws, tools. A rhythmic grinding, steady and controlled. I lifted my camera, zooming in through the hole. The lens fogged immediately. When I wiped it clear, a face stared back. Its eyes were wide, skin grey and cracked, mouth frozen in mid-breath. It wasn't decayed exactly, more preserved, like stone carved to resemble flesh. Its lips didn't move, but the hum deepened, now vibrating through the ground under my knees. Lorna screamed and stumbled back, but the sound didn't echo. It was swallowed whole. The face pressed closer, distorting slightly, as though the surface between us wasn't metal anymore, but liquid glass. A hand appeared beside it, calloused, smeared in black residue, gripping the bars. The chains rattled violently. The gate bowed inward. I grabbed Lorna's arm. Run. We bolted for the tree line. The ground trembled beneath us. Behind, the noise grew. Voices layered into a single desperate chant. Hold the beam, keep the light. We didn't stop until the truck was in sight. When I reached for the handle, I froze. The passenger door was open. Lorna's side. I turned. She was gone. The hum from the ridge rose into a full roar, echoing through the valley like machinery buried under miles of stone. I shouted her name until my throat tore, but the tunnel only answered with that same phrase, perfectly clear this time, spoken in her voice. Help us open it. I drove to town in a haze, called every agency I could think of. County Sheriff, Emergency Services, Geological Survey. They all sent people up. They found nothing. The gate was sealed again. No hole, no chains, no sign it had ever been disturbed, and no trace of Lorna. That night, when I reviewed the photos on my camera, the last image wasn't of the gate at all. It was a picture taken from inside the tunnel, showing me crouched on the outside looking in. I didn't tell anyone about the photograph. The county men had already written me off as exhausted and hysterical. Shock, one of them said, handing me a clipboard to sign, but there was no way to explain how my camera, sitting outside the gate, had captured an image from inside the tunnel. 3 nights later, I went back. Not to search for Lorna. Not at first. I just needed to see the tunnel again, to prove to myself it existed. The official crews had fenced off the ridge, warning tape fluttering in the wind. But there was no guard, no watch. I brought a new flashlight, a crowbar, and my recorder. The woods were silent the entire hike up, as if sound itself didn't dare approach that place. When I reached the slope, the air thickened, the same taste of wet iron, the same impossible chill. The fence had been torn down, not cut or climbed, torn. Sections lay bent backward like something had pushed through from the inside. And the tunnel mouth was open. The gate lay twisted at the base of the slope, metal scorched and blackened. The archway yawned wider than before, a jagged wound in the earth. A low orange glow pulsed within, brighter now, steady as a heartbeat. I switched on the recorder. Field log, return visit, entry compromised. My own voice sounded small, brittle. The first few feet inside were damp and slick. The air vibrated faintly under my boots, as though machinery was working somewhere deep underground. The orange light wasn't coming from fire, it was phosphorescent, bleeding from the walls themselves. Patterns of melted iron ran like veins through the stone, glowing and dimming in sequence. The tunnel curved left. Farther down, I saw movement. Figures, faint and shrouded in haze. Their outlines flickered with the same rhythm as the light. Lorna, no response, just the echo of my voice bending back wrong, drawn out like it was sinking through water. The figures straightened slowly. There were 6, maybe more. Each wore old miner's gear, oil-stained and stiff. Helmets cracked and hanging askew. Their eyes glowed faint orange, same colour as the walls. One stepped forward. The sound of boots on stone reverberated too long. When it spoke, its voice carried the grinding timbre of rock collapsing. "We kept the light." The others joined in, repeating the same phrase, their mouths opening too wide. "We kept the light. We kept the light." I stumbled backward, bumping the wall. It was hot now, hot enough to blister. The orange glow brightened, flooding the passage until I could barely see. Then the ceiling above groaned. Dust fell like ash. A voice whispered behind me, "Lorna's. Don't run, it's not finished." I turned. She stood just beyond the glow, face pale but unbroken, eyes black and glassy. Her clothes were soaked in that same molten sheen, as if the rock itself had started growing through her skin. "Lorna?" Her head tilted. We opened it. The walls shifted. The tunnel pulsed once, deep enough to shake my teeth. I dropped the recorder and ran. The ground heaved underfoot, cracks splitting across the floor. Behind me, the voices chanted faster, overlapping until they became a single roaring current of sound. When I burst out into the night, the ridge was collapsing. The hillside sank inward, swallowing itself in slow motion. Dust rose in a glowing plume as the arch folded and sealed, leaving nothing but raw stone and scattered metal. I didn't stop running until I reached the truck. My hands shook too hard to fit the key into the ignition. When I finally started the engine, I looked back one last time. The ridge was still, no light, no tunnel, but the radio on my dashboard crackled, tuning itself to an empty channel. Through the static, a voice whispered low, steady, familiar. "Hold the beam, keep the light." The same chant, the same rhythm, only this time it wasn't coming from the quarry, it was coming from under the truck. The headlights flickered, then turned orange. They sealed the ridge again the next morning. But at night, locals say you can still see the ground breathing, and sometimes the old floodlights glow beneath the soil, waiting for someone else to open it.